Thank you so much for coming and being in this tiny room together. But we can see your faces, and hopefully there will be a lot of discussion and questions. That's really what we want. So in a lot of ways, this is a good room. This is Women in Emergency Medicine Leadership, a call for faculty development and methods for improving the pipeline. So a little bit about the goals before I go into the panel. Some of the objectives are to discuss different leadership roles in administration and academics and pathways to achieving these roles, implement best practices and models for faculty development programs with a focus on enhancing the advancement of women, describe best practices for creating and maintaining a pipeline of future women leaders, list specific strategies and metrics which capture diversification of faculty, discuss ways in which diversity and inclusion enhance staff satisfaction, engagement, advancement, and clinical care. And this didactic is supported by the SAEM Faculty Development Committee, as well as the Equity and Inclusion Committee, as well as ADIEM. So thank you to our sponsors. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm the Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at Long Island Jewish Medical Center, which is part of Northwell Health. I'm an Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra. And we have an immense panel. I'm going to actually have each of our panelists introduce themselves.
I'll start. I am Nicole Franks. Good afternoon. I am the Chief Quality Officer at Emory University Hospital Midtown and a Professor of Emergency Medicine in the Emory University School of Medicine.
I'm Michelle Lal. I'm also from Emory. I'm an Associate Professor there, and I'm our Medical Education Fellowship Director, as well as our Director of Wellbeing, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
And she's also on the Board of Directors for SAEM, so I'll add that in there. So I'm Deb Derricks. I'm Chair of Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annabelle Salvador. I'm the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Northwell Health, New York's largest healthcare system, also the Senior Vice President of Medical Staff Affairs and recovering emergency medicine physician. I admit I am still addicted to emergency medicine, and I struggle with that addiction every day. But it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm also Associate Professor at the School of Medicine, the Zucker School of Medicine. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to have them say a little bit more about that background, but I think we're going to save that for the panel. We're just going to go into some data slides to begin with. Oh, and in terms of disclosures, Dr. Dirks has institutional research support from Quidel, Roche, Abbott, and Siemens, and the rest of us not.
So I'm going to get us started with laying a little bit of foundation for the discussion that we'll have today. And in the context of the state of women in leadership, despite your call to serve, both as a physician, even as a leader, what I want to impress upon you is you really need to understand your value. So if we go to the next slide, I really like this. If you've been here all day, actually Dr. Gottlieb was here. She actually spoke in depth about this, but this is a really good framework, and what I want you to pay attention to is not so much the specifics right now, because that's not the point of this discussion today, but to really look at the buckets and understand, and we're going to have conversation around why those buckets are important, why you understand what the barriers and challenges are as you move as a woman who wants to advance in leadership and what our opportunities could be. You can go to the next slide. So I'll just also kind of bring to your attention that there is a salary gap. This is information from the most recent faculty salary survey from the AAMC. And basically what you should get from this is there is a discrepancy not only between gender between men and women, where women are earning 67 to 77 cents less compared to white men, but also within the gender identification, you see the race and ethnicity disparity as well. Okay, so it's just there's great opportunity, but we have to first start with awareness, and we leverage our data to do so. So I'm going to invite Dr. Lal into the conversation. She's going to give a little bit more foundation, and then we'll get started with the discussion.
Okay, so this has been ongoing work for years, right? This is not new. As Dr. Heron eloquently told us yesterday, this is over 20 years of work, and we're still not there. right? So several years ago, Esther Chu, this was a collaboration between AWEM and AWEP, so the Women's Academies of both ASEP and SAEM, to develop best practices on recommendations for hiring women. And you can see we continue. There's more and more publications. Like, these haven't stopped. We know the disparities exist. The one in the top corner that was an AEM, that was led by Tracy Madsen. And we actually showed in academic emergency medicine, the salary disparity is close to $20,000 between men and women. And we controlled for essentially every variable you can control for. And then the one on the bottom too, again, this came out of some of our work through AWEM, but really looking at strategies, again, for recruitment, retention, and promotion, right? So this was a little bit different than Esther Chu's paper because we were really focused on promotion and retention, right? So those of you who are in academia, promotion is the currency to everything we do, and there are great disparities in promotion as well. So leadership is at a premium, right? So I'll let you guess, right? So the left side of this slide, right? We're seeing everybody looks kind of equal, right? At the entry level, the men, the women, women of color, men of color, white women, white men. And then what happens as we progress, right? As we get up to that C-suite? Well, I see a majority of white men. I see a majority of men and a minority of women, and particularly women of color. So this is from McKinsey & Company, but our graphic for medicine looks exactly the same. So again, the pipeline, right? It follows these same gaps as other industry. Medicine's been slower than some other industry to catch up here. But when you look at this, so the blue lines are all academic medicine, and then the orange are emergency medicine specifically. But what do you see in this trend, right? Again, if you look at instructor, there's a lot of people there, and then what happens? It's just this steep decline and ultimately drop off. And Dr. Dierks, I'm sure, will speak to later that she is part of the very small collective of women chairs in emergency medicine. And it's a number that's remained relatively stable for years. So we're still not making that jump. We're still not moving forward, right? So we've talked about salary. We've talked about promotion. We've talked about the pipeline. So it is multifactorial. So I'll have Nancy's gonna lead us here.
So I'm going to have our panelists sit in the chairs here. So I'm going to throw, while we're getting set up, I'm going to throw out a question to the audience. For how many of you does this data surprise you, or that you didn't know? Is it surprising to any of you? No? Okay. So I'm glad that you know a little data, and it's just like reinforcing it. And I also am very pleased to see that the audience is filled with all genders and not just women. And that's an important concept in terms of allyship. And I do also just want to highlight that Dr. Haran is here, who gave a wonderful keynote speech. So let's just give her a round of applause. And thank you for being here as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I'm going to start by opening up to the panel, this problem that we have here, and why has it remained so stable, some of these numbers, for so many years, and what are the issues, and what do we need to do about it? And I know that's a lot of big questions, but I wanted to see, your insights as a start. Who wants to go first?
So I'll start. I think you wanted us to talk a little bit about how we came into leadership. So I'll kind of start with that and then maybe answer the question a little bit. So I had always aspired to be a hospital leader. I really very much enjoy the environment of the hospital and the craziness of it and the variety, which is why I'm an emergency medicine physician. So it's really just the ER on steroids, the hospital. And so that pathway for me was assistant medical director of the emergency department, subsequently associate medical director, and then one of the physician executive leader positions, specifically chief quality officer. My trajectory there was really about one, knowing I wanted to be a leader, but I was undefined. I had no idea what a chief quality that didn't even exist when I came out of residency. And so it was something I found myself where I landed. But what benefited me in terms of what is important as we talk about pipeline and development of women leaders is that I had mentors and I had sponsors. And I, was fortunate enough to say, you know what, this doesn't happen often, but you're going to be this person. You're going to be that person. And as much as, we've seen that happen probably more with men than women, I've actually benefited from that. But in order to do that, you actually have to show up and you actually have to produce. And that's why I talked about those 4 buckets, because all of that is important in what you bring to the table so you can make the short list and you begin to move forward. So that's one story. That's not the only story. And we really need to know all the stories as we think about how we move through the pipeline. That's just one journey.
Thank you, Nicole. And my story is slightly different because I'm also in corporate administration currently, and I used to be in the hospital administration prior to that. But it was not the career path I thought I was going to be in. So when I graduated from residency, I thought I was going to be a program director because I loved to teach, I loved education, I loved being with the residents and the students. So I did that for about a year, and then I got tapped on the shoulder. We think, we need a quality person for the department. Please, can you be the quality person? I said, I don't know anything about quality, but I'll try it. And so I really enjoyed that role as well. And so my career, I thought I was going to be, okay, I'll do quality. I'm going to be an associate chair. And one day I had inspired to be a chair. And then eventually I'm going to get to the service line level. And that's kind of the path that I was on until somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, okay, we need you to be the associate chair, but that didn't last long because we want you to be the associate medical director of the hospital. And I said, I don't know anything about hospital operations. I don't have an MBA. I've never done any executive courses. And they said, we don't care. We see how you operate in the emergency department and how you operate, with the flow and all of the things that were important to the hospital. And the fact that I went outside of the department because I was very much into operations and being involved in committees and being outside of the department and working with others. And I think, to your point, it's about being seen and being present. So don't be afraid to leave the department if you want to test and try different things. And then once I got to the hospital level, corporate administration saw the work that I did and asked me to move to corporate. But I think Nicole and I have had this conversation before. You have to be present and you have to kind of raise your hand and you have to tell people you're interested. Sometimes we lose people because we don't know that you have an interest. And women tend to keep things inside more, or we're afraid, or we don't speak up until we know every single box. Have you ever seen job descriptions and women will read that and go, okay, I only have 4.5 years, not 5 years of experience, so I'm not going to apply, right? So you want to take a chance. Sometimes you just have to speak up.
I think there's a lot of commonality, and that's to show up and produce. I'll be honest. I think that is the key to kind of all of our success. If any of us hadn't done that, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere. I think my path is I showed up, and I have been really fortunate to develop a lot of friends along the way who weren't in emergency medicine. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't, because I frankly got a call to say, hey, will you apply for a chair job? And I said, huh? They're like, yeah, it's in Dallas. I'm like, I've been to the airport, And so had I not had this relationships I'd built through research and showing up and developing some great friendships, they wouldn't have cold called me, because I frankly did not apply for my job. I got called, which is a little unusual, and then showed up, and there just happened to be 2 people on the search committee that I'd done research with, and that kind of continues on, where now our, the associate vice president of clinical research now is a guy I'd done research with, and so it's allowed me to kind of help people along the way, because I've gotten these connections from just showing up. And it still is it's a bit curse, right? Because now I've got my amplifiers on clinical chairs, and then you're like, They vote you into like chair of the clinical chairs, you know, and so that kind of support group is really what helps. And it's just showing up, and it's just chatting at lunch. And I don't think you have to be the brightest, because I know I'm not. I don't think you have to be the best, because I know I'm not. I think you just have to do what you say you're going to do and just be in the room.
Yeah, so I started my career thinking I was going to be a program director also, and I actually worked in residency leadership for 12 years before I pivoted out. And so one, it's okay to change your mind. It like doesn't destroy your career, right? Like 12 years is a long time to invest in a pathway that you abandon. So it's okay to change your mind, number one. But number two, find the things that you love, right? You have to find what holds your interest. And as everybody has said, this is about showing up and then following through on the commitment, right? So if I write a paper with you and your stuff is always done by the deadline, you're proactive, well, guess what? Next time I need to write, I'm going to ask you to write with me again. But if you don't follow through and I end up writing your part of the paper, I will never ask you again, right? So you have to show up and you have to perform, right? Meet the expectations. I also, like, to echo what Dr. Dirk said, like, I'm not the smartest, I'm not the best, but if I tell you I'm going to do it, I will do it to 150%. End of story. It might be wrong, the end product, or we might need to revise it, but I will do it, right? So that's a lot of this. And I've also been very fortunate to have a lot of mentors and sponsors, both within my department, but also externally. And I think that for me has been really critical to have people who can really bring an outside perspective to things that I'm wondering about, or if I'm considering, or what does that really look like? And my pathway to leadership really has been national service. So I started with AWEM when it was a brand new academy, because Gloria Kuhn, who was one of my mentors in medical school, said, Michelle, I need someone to bring residents into this organization. And I was like, well, I don't know what this organization is. Well, come on, we're gonna take all the women from our department, we're gonna go to dinner, I'm gonna tell you what it is. I said, all right, well, Gloria told me to do it, so I'm gonna do it. And I did, and that was the beginning, right? And then from there, I went to the membership chair, to the treasurer, to the president, right? And that's what brought me to the board of SAEM. And it was meeting more people, making connections, growing the network, and following through. And a lot of the work, you know, at least for me, that I do in equity, it's because I want it to be better. I don't want this generation who's coming behind me to have imposter syndrome, to feel like they won't be there, to not be heard. Right? So this is why this is a long journey, and we're not done. There's a long way to go. But I think the other thing to recognize is that sometimes the struggles for women are different, right? Annabella talked about, you look at the thing and you're like, oh, but I'm not qualified. You know, and I've received emails for opportunities, and I start reading it. I'm like, why are they emailing me? I don't meet these criteria. What are they asking me for, right? But that's when you have to sometimes take the leap of faith to find out. We tend to believe that we are not qualified for a lot of things. So be present, and if you say you're going to do it, please just do it.
For anybody.
For everybody.
And I'll tell you about myself briefly. I'm Nancy Kwon. I'm the Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at Long Island Jewish. I have the benefit of working with Dr. Salvador. And I didn't realize I was going to be in this position either. I had worked at NYU Bellevue for many years beforehand, and I thought I was going to be a researcher, if anything. And it took me, you know, up to like 10 years before to realize that's not, I enjoy research, but that's not what I was. I had wanted to sort of maybe like advance into some sort of leadership position at NYU Bellevue, and it was a very wonderful place to work. You know, we're still a family. I see some of my former coworkers here. But oh, medical students, I'm sorry. Can't even remember. And he's still in medical school. No, just kidding. He's actually the chair. He's the chair at Cornell. And an advocate of women. But, you know, those, you know, for many reasons, those leadership opportunities didn't exist at that time at NYU Bellevue. So despite the fact that I raised my hand It didn't exist. It was, a long time ago. It was 20 years ago. And things have changed, but obviously we know things still have to change. The opportunity arose when actually a former co-resident of mine called me and said, there's a leadership opportunity as an associate chair at Long Island Jewish. Are you interested? And, I think I'm one of those people like, well, I'm comfortable here. What if it's not the right fit, or what if, I fail? But, he advocated for me. I went to go see it, and, and next thing I knew, I was there, became an associate chair, became a vice chair. And I think, there was somebody who, looked out for me, advocated for me, and that was not the advocacy, at that time that I had to get into a leadership position at my former institution. So, I think sometimes if you're in a place and you're not feeling you're getting the support or the mentorship, you either seek them out and find them, or maybe it's not the right place. And sometimes going into a new place or location with different people can actually change the trajectory of your career in a very positive way. So that's a little bit about my story. And I want to open it up to the panel and also to the audience, right? Because we don't want to talk to you. We want you to be part of the conversation. So I want to see if any of the audience has any questions. And, oh, this is great. This is going to be easy.
So I would just like to follow on from what you asked before. Why are the stats static? Why haven't why don't we have more women in positions of leadership?
So I was sitting here thinking about it and looking around the room about some talented people and some talented leaders, and you've got some front rows, some people who are in the School of Medicine. And when you think especially about clinical leadership or department chair leadership, it is a rough road if you are an educator. I'm just going to state it, right? Because when you think about department chairs, they want you to have research, right? They want you to have clinical experience. They don't really care if you're an educator, right? And so when we talk about leadership in emergency medicine, especially department chairs, a lot of our talent and our great women who are extremely, extremely talented go the education track. And if we can't flip that, we're going to have a hard time getting women in clinical leadership positions like CMOs, where they can make a huge difference, and department chairs. And that's going to be it's a big step for us, because 90% of people who come and want academics want education, right? And the 10% who don't usually aren't women. So I think that that's one of the things that we have to consider, that no one's going to change the deans. And the deans are hired because of their ability to raise money and their research portfolio. And they're going to look for people who look just like them. And so it is very, very difficult. And so I think that's one of the challenges we're going to have if we don't recognize that that is a barrier that we have to get past. Now, educational research may be a way to get through it, but I do think we need to be think about how we boxed ourselves in a little bit to seek those leadership positions outside of the dean's office as far as GME.
Other questions? Thank you, Dr. Yerkes. Don't be shy. Dr. Ezenkwili. Another former coworker.
Yes, Nancy. So first, thank you to the panel for this. I think this is incredibly important. My name is Ooga Ezenkwili. I'm over in Mount Sinai, Queens. I run the community academic site. And I had a question about really trying to foster growth in some of my female faculty who work with us. So every year we have to do a faculty appraisal, and I always give them a choice of whether they want to do the promotion track or really just do their clinical shifts and be done with it. It's a community academic site, so there's no pressure to do all the research and education and go down that path. One thing I struggle with is more, if not, like more of my female faculty just say, no, I don't want to do promotion. I don't want to go down that path. So my question to you is, when would it be seen as overstepping? If not, I'm saying, well, ignoring what what their desire is, and pushing them more towards, let's do administration, let's do something, leadership. Or should I just be like, okay, I respect your very wishes, you have your own personal agenda as to what you want to do, So when would it not be seen as overstepping to go down that path?
That's a great question.
You're not the only one that struggles with that. So as you're trying to develop your junior faculty or others, what I would say is, or at least the tactic that I have tried, is to just really understand what are you interested in? And then you kind of have to gauge what kind of box are they drawing around them in terms of, I only want to do this much. And is it worth pushing them outside of the box or getting them to maximize everything they can inside the box? I think an invitation, sometimes people need to be volatile, an invitation to serve on a hospital committee. I cannot get to this committee. Could you go one time for me? And then you have them come back. I think that where we lose people when we ask people to present or to participate on hospital committees or some committees, so we don't ask them to come back and report. Well, what happened? You don't ask them, they just go and they show up and they check the box. But you ask them, well, what happened? Did you speak up about it? Are you driving anything there? What perspective did you represent for emergency medicine? And so it's sort of helping to develop them in terms of an involvement. It may be in something that they're interested in. Get on the ethics committee. You always bring this up. I think you might really enjoy that work, and get them involved there. And but again, it is small things. Can you just go for me this one time? Here's my 3 points. There's something, and try to just kind of give them a little bit, see how they do, give them a little feedback. I find that if you do that and they get a little small win, then there's a build of confidence. Because sometimes it's the fear of the unknown, and it's like, I'm just trying to work here. Or a fear of what kind of time is that going to mean for me? And then, then there's always those who don't want to do anything unless they know, well, what am I getting paid for? So you also have to be armed with, well, what's the return on investment? And that's a good discussion anyway, because everybody wants to understand the return on investment. So to be able to understand and articulate that, I think is also helpful too. Well, you get to learn this, and maybe it's just you're doing me a favor, and I appreciate it because I get to be here, and if I get to be here, then I get to represent this interest for you. But I can't be in both places. How can you help me out? So that would be, I don't know if you guys have any advice.
So I think to your point, it also depends on where you are in your career and at what stage of life. So I've heard from multiple women sometimes when they have the children that are really small, they don't have the time to dedicate it, and that's okay. But then when the kids go to school, then maybe they do have the time. So I think always offering it to them and always supporting them, I think is really important. I had a social worker that used to be my associate director. I used to oversee social work and case management at one point, and she was fantastic. She had little kids, and I wanted to make her the director, but she couldn't give me 5 days a week, and in order to be a director, you needed to be 5 days a week. I said, that's okay, I'm not gonna fill that position. She said, but it could be a year before I come back. I can't tell you when I come back. I said, that's okay, I don't need that director right now. I said, but I'm gonna hold that position for you. And 2 years later, she came back, she said, I'm ready to work the 5 days, from 4 to 5 days. I said, great, because I still have that position. And she gave the amount that she gave back to the hospital was just incredible, because she remembered what we did for her, right? That now she's actually the social worker that oversees our whole entire social work system. She oversees all of the social workers in the system. But when I first asked her, the time wasn't right. But still believing in her and supporting her through whatever phase she was going to, they remember that, and then they're willing to give back more. So.
And I'm sure Michelle has some great points. But I just kind of want to mention, when you talk about promotion, a lot of people think scholarship, and that creates a visceral response in some people that stops them dead in their, like, I don't have time. How can I do that? And so I think one of the things that's worked for people that were really reluctant to actually do scholarship is bring in a team. So you're talking to one individual. If you have 3 individuals that you want to put on the promotion track and say, you all are interested in X, why don't you collaborate and work together to do scholarship? And then it takes that angst of an individual, as I don't have time, to a group that can work together and they can each build on each other's strengths to succeed. Because I think anybody who thinks that you're going to succeed in promotion in a kind of up or out or even like true scholarship pathway and thinks you're going to do it yourself, that's a lonely job, right? And it is a hard road. But if you can create a group of people that you can work together with, that makes it so much easier because, frankly, it's time, right? It's having to go home and make sure you get the kids to school and we all have life things to do. And sometimes from a female perspective, their burden may be a little different, especially when they're junior. So we need to flip the conversation around scholarship from an individual to a team. It's a team sport. And I think that'll take away a lot of the angst that women have, especially in their junior faculty role, about trying to do that next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing, too, is to ask what are the barriers, right? So we're having the conversation, and you see the hesitation come across my face, right? And I do think a lot of us need, especially when we're more junior, need positive affirmation. So, like, that, it would have been really meaningful to me to have my medical director say, like, I really think you could excel in this role, but I can see that you're hesitant. Like, how can I help you? What are the barriers? What support do you need from me? Right? And feeling like there is somebody who might need to hold my hand for a little bit until I'm okay on my own. But I think that those are important conversations because I think the barriers for everybody are different. They might seem the same and we might make assumptions, right, about childcare or elder care or whatever it might be in our personal lives, but maybe that's not actually her barrier. Maybe it's something totally different. So I think, it sounds like you have a great rapport with your people. Like, just ask, have a really open conversation about what is the barrier and how can I help? Because then you take them off the island, right? Then it's a team effort, right? It's you and me helping me with this step, not me just trying to stumble around and figure it out myself.
I'm getting my steps in. This is awesome.
Hi, I'm Brianne Jacobs from George Washington. I heard this talk when I was a resident and I didn't have kids, and I was always scratching my head like, why is there the gap? And then I became a mom and I totally understood why the gap exists. And it wasn't because I didn't ever ask for more money, because I always asked for more money, and I was told no, this is the base rate for everybody. This is the we don't give any more. And then I realized when meeting other physician colleagues, we are choosing positions not because of money a lot of the times, and it's not necessarily women, some men do this too, but they're choosing it because it fits our lifestyle for where our children want to go to school, or we have a mother-in-law in the area, or whatever. And a lot of times, just by focusing on the money, it doesn't tell the whole picture, because so many great women, just as you're saying, aren't taking these positions and don't want to take those positions because it may mean more money, but it means more time away from home or more time away from their kids, and it's just not worth it. It's not our priority. And I feel like a lot of the male physicians, again, not all of them, obviously, they're willing to take on those extra hospital committee roles, and sometimes they let the burden of the childcare stuff fall into their spouse and willing to commit more at the work to the extra committees and extra time. Whereas for me, I'm not going to do a committee if it's not a direct path to get me somewhere where I want to be, whether it's getting a promotion for more pay or activity at the hospital that I want to do, because my time is so valuable. You have to make it worth my while. I'm not just going to do it because it's part of my professional responsibility. It's not worth it if I can work clinically more hours and make more money and get me home to my kids quicker. So I just wanted to comment that when I became a mom, it totally changed, and I understand why so many women are not making what their male colleagues are, and it's not because we're not asking for it, and it's not because we have imposter syndrome. I think a lot of us are consciously choosing because a lot of us have other priorities.
So I totally respect that, but there is a discrepancy, and it is because there are deals, right? So I would not ever think that there is not a difference, because there is. And I can say, is there a difference in my department because we're perfect? We look at it, and so there is not. Thank you for some people who like to work a ton and are women. But it is a reality. There are deals made in academics, and they are there, and majority of the time, people ask them. And there are huge differences by gender. And it's either because they asked, it's either because they weren't transparent in how they decided things, but I can guarantee I make less than most of the male chairs. Guarantee it. Right? Now, would I change my job because of that? No. Do I know it? Yeah, that's something I have. That's my decision on whether I'm going to push forward or not. But I would never be naive to think that there is not a difference in gender, because it just exists. And if it's not your department, it's the one next to you. And so we just have to be cognizant of it and ask for transparency.
I just wanted to make a comment, because I completely appreciate you sharing that perspective. And because I can think of an advocate right now who has that mindset, but is now looking up and saying, I've been here this long, and I haven't really done anything but work. So while I appreciate, again, and I said it, what's the return on investment? You really have to make a good decision about that. But what are you missing? You're missing skill development. You're missing relationship building. You're missing opportunity. That even if you did this one small thing, that yes, means you come in an hour early unpaid for your shift to go to this committee, but you now know someone from every department who then maybe your next thing you need to build a coalition for something else. Or you might even realize, even as your day-to-day work is a little easier because they know you in a different frame. So I just want to invite you to, I want to invite everybody to you know, committee work is a trap. Depending on who the leader is and how the committee is run. But you won't learn if you're one of those people who are trapping others in committees if you haven't developed how to run a good committee or to run a good meeting. Just not even a committee, a meeting is a whole skill in and of itself. So don't underestimate that just because you're not getting something right out of the bat, you may not have any skills. Why should I pay you? You don't know anything. But I'm giving you an opportunity to learn and be exposed, and so then you do have more to bring to the table and to negotiate and get even more for the next ask. But if you haven't even done anything, that's just not inherent. It just doesn't work that way. So I just wanted to give the balance of that, because that's a very important point, and I encourage everybody to make the decision for themselves, but understand what you're leaving on the table so that that's balanced.
Annabelle? Committees are a trap unless it's SAM. I just want to focus.
Was there another question? Or? Oh, no. Well, I was gonna respond. I was just gonna say that I agree with you about the committees. As far as, for me, being on committees made my ER job a hell of a lot easier, because when I knew all the hospitalists and I knew all the surgeons, when I called them for admissions, nobody yelled at me. It's kind of like road rage. If they don't know it, if they don't know you, they yell at you. They make your life miserable. But when they go, oh, it's Annabelle. Oh, Annabelle, it's you. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll take the admission. It makes it a lot easier. So I always try to look at the other benefits that I gained by doing the committee work.
I think what everybody said is really great points, and definitely showing up is really important. You know, in terms of the disparities that Dr. Dirks talk about, we all know that they exist. So I guess, you know, my next question is, you know, knowing that there's pay disparities, you know, obviously, I guess a question to you is like, do any of you have work in a place where the leadership is mostly women? Raise your hand if that exists. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. And then yourself, where do you work? At Stanford. Okay, so 2 places out of how many people? 50. So, but knowing this, right? So we want to look at this problem. Like, what are ways to address it? You know, I think knowing that there's a salary gap, knowing that there's very few chairs. Like, how do we address this problem? What are some potential solutions?
So we had the get them involved discussion. And I think that it has to be very intentional. And it's not just the women pulling other women up. I'll say I had numerous male mentors and sponsors who pulled me up. So it is a superpower for you to be advocates if you're in any type of leadership position, as well as a responsibility to bring others along. So that is one thing, being intentional about it. Yes, there is the opportunity to build training programs, leadership programs, and affinity groups. Michelle did a paper and has a whole long list of solutions. So, and she quoted some of those. But I just want to highlight some of the ones that I've personally benefited from. And getting involved in going to meetings where there are affinity groups, or I think it's huge because it provides a safe space for you to discuss things, for you to address similar issues. And so that's really important in learning how to connect. Internally, as leaders, supporting those in the moment, managing up, bringing them into the conversation. These are all really small, positive acts of kindness, or I can't think of the opposite word for a microaggression, but they're the opposite of that. That little small thing you do on the positive side can go, microaffirmation, thank you. That goes so far, especially in a meeting, in an introduction, when you're walking down the street. If you happen to pass by the dean, introduce the dean to your faculty member and encourage them to say who they are. Have the elevator speech ready. What are you interested in? Because they will ask you. You need to be ready. Be able to say something that they can remember you by. And it's just building that having that opportunity to build a relationship.
Yeah, I think you have to be very proactive, and you need somebody in the department that's actually looking at it and speaking up as well, right? Because if you don't look at it, you don't see it. Ask for data. Look at your numbers. See how many leaders are female. See how many faculty members are female. How many residents are female. How many awards are given in your department where they're females? Look at who's writing your papers. How many are first authors? You have to look at all of those things, and then where there's deficiencies, you have to work on that. One time I had a meeting that I had to go to. I was chairing our procedural product committee, where our organization was looking at every device that was coming into the system. And I had to present the concept in this committee to the medical directors of the institute and all the chairs. So I had a program manager working with me, and I said, okay, create a slide for me. And we were at meetings, and there was women in the meetings. I said, create a slide for me, and I want the voting members on the left, all the other members on the right, and the voting members were made up of all the surgeons that were on there. And I almost fell off my chair, literally, because when I looked at the list of all the surgeons, there was not a single female surgeon on the list. And I said, who initially put this group together? I said, I cannot go in front of the medical directors and the chairs with this list until we get some women on this list. So I delayed it, I tabled the whole thing, and I said, I will handpick the female surgeons I want on the committee, and we got it somewhat balanced. But it wasn't until I divided up the group, because we had women there, but the women was myself, but I'm not a surgeon. I had another physician who was our researcher who reviewed all of the devices, and then everybody else was part of procurement or pharmacy support. It wasn't the surgeons. But it wasn't even apparent to me until I divided it up. So even somebody who's focused on it, until you really look at it, you have to do a deep dive.
So I think when you're thinking about it, you're never going to feel as valued at home as you do when you go to national meetings and get engaged, where people reaffirm how great you are, and you get that information when you come to meetings like SAM. And like Michelle, I grew up in SAM. I started when I was a senior resident, I think, and I've been a member since, and have kind of done the up, down, and around kind of thing. Do everything, right? But, and so you get that affirmation and that support. If you're not getting it locally, get it someplace like this, because that boost of confidence are invaluable. But then when you get home, respect yourself, right? So I'm my residence, I'm pretty informal. I'm Deb and stuff. And I used to introduce myself as Deb all the time, and I started this job doing it until I started getting emails from med students. Hey, Deb, will you do that? And I'm like, would you email the department chair of surgery and say, hey, Deb, right? No, and I get a Mrs. So-and-so from credentialing. And I'm like, what the heck, do you want my daughter? She's a med student, right? So be intentional on how you sign your emails. I don't need to sign my emails, Dr. Dierks, but I will sign them DD, right? Especially if I don't know you. If I know you, it's just up. So for my residents and stuff, and I got a bunch in here because we have a bunch of residents, when you answer the phone, right, it's not your last name. It's Dr. So-and-so, right? That's who you are. It's Dr. So-and-so, can I help you, right? Give yourself the credit. Give yourself that professionalism that you deserve to be treated with. And so sometimes as women and even as men, we cut that short in emergency medicine. We don't acknowledge that we've earned that title, and that's who we are. And if we don't expect and treat ourselves like that and call ourselves that, how can we expect somebody else to? So it's well known and kind of reported in surgical literature, when they go to professional meetings, the men are introduced as doctors and the women are introduced as their first name, right? Stop it. That's our job to stop it, right? And if we hear it, correct it. So again, I think one of the things, if we're gonna become leaders and more engaged, we need to treat ourselves like that and give us the credit we deserve.
So I think, a couple things. So one, right, you can't say yes to everything. And I know sometimes I still do it sometimes to myself, right? So I was going to say when I was more junior, but that's a lie. Like, I still do it now. But just, if you decline with grace and be professional about it, right? And I now have the virtue of being able to say, that is a wonderful opportunity. I don't have the bandwidth for it, but let me introduce you to Dr. So-and-so who does, right? That's sponsorship, right? It's pulling somebody else up and giving them the opportunity, right? And frankly, like, I get many opportunities that don't really interest me anymore because I have pivoted away from my original career, but I have a little pipeline of people that I start calling when these things come in and, to bring them with me. I think the other thing too is, our numbers of women just entering emergency medicine have been very stagnant. We looked at our numbers at Emory and the numbers nationally, and we're pretty stuck at about 35%. And I think one of those things, I remember when I was a medical student, people were like, oh, emergency medicine's the best specialty for families. You have all these days off, you can work whenever you want. Okay, so that's a lie. You have a schedule and are expected to show up on those days, right? But I think there was a failure to acknowledge that depending on kind of where you are in your life cycle, some of that flexibility is really hard. So if I have now, all my kids are school age, finally, thank goodness. But now if I work 3 to 11, 3 or 4 days in a row, I don't see my children for 4 days. And it's really hard on my husband, right? And so, and when my kids were littler, it was still really hard, but I would be with them in the morning, and we had this bridge of childcare, and then my husband had him in the evening. But it was hard. I was tired all the time, right? So I think we also all have to acknowledge that our needs change. And maybe you have a really open director, and you've had a conversation with them, but if your situation changes and you can take on more, or you need to drop something off your plate, just tell them. I think a lot of times we're very afraid to advocate for ourselves and our personal needs, and it's okay to say, I've had many conversations with Dr. Heron about, I got asked to do this, is it okay if I say no? I still ask her, she'll tell you, I want to double check, right? Because I don't want to burn a professional bridge. I want to make sure that I'm still keeping opportunities coming, but it is okay to say no, or not right now, or maybe we can talk about this next year, right? Just make sure you do it with grace and that you keep yourself visible, because I think what happens sometimes is I've watched people say no or not right now enough times that then they become invisible, right? They're not even on someone's radar anymore to ask about a specific opportunity, right? And I think that's what happens to a lot of women. They just become invisible.
Can I comment on your comment? Shown here on Emory University. So what Dr. Law is talking about is get yourself a board of directors, right? So inside and outside of your institution, somebody who sort of knows you and can point you. And first of all, thank you all for this great panel, by the way, who can say, well, how is that valuable, right? People are interested in time and money. That's it, right? If it affects your time and your money, and time meaning time with your family and time for yourself, you have to ask yourself, is this appropriate at this time, and will that lead you in the direction that you want to go? And if you don't know You ask your board of directors and say, hey, I'm interested in this, what do you think? And I'm straight, no chaser, no, yes, no, yeah. You know, but give yourself permission to do that, because you may not know that because you're in it and you don't see it and you may not understand it. And so you look at all of the individuals in your circle who can lend different prisms of thoughts around this and reset your thinking about keeping yourself well, right? Because at the end of the day, it's keeping yourself well and whole so you can function and want to get up every day and invest the time that you want to invest. So the point, I have a board of directors and I call people, text people, and just keep that in mind when you're thinking about how you want to move forward. And is it in the lane that you've defined for yourself? And yes, sometimes you need to be nudged, as Dr. Frank said, and that's okay. That's okay. So I just wanted to amplify that.
Thank you. Dr. Howie.
So I may not work at Stanford, where there are that many women, but I'm very lucky in that I have women in leadership where I am, and Nancy and Annabella are those people. I think you guys have all talked about the majority of the work is us working on ourselves. A very small idea, though, is the reality is in most places, men are still the ones who are running and by definition have to create this pipeline. And I think us recognizing allyship ends up being an essential quality. And I actually think what we should do, and we could be a different group of we, is get pins. And as a group, you give a pin to someone who is a defined ally, or you give them an award, or you give them something. Because if it's physical and recognizable, then other people want to do it too. And that demonstrates that you have done something where you have reached that hand down to get that person. And of course, that allyship could be female pipeline. It could be underrepresented minority pipeline. It could be sex gender pipeline. It could be whatever pipeline you want to talk about. But if you're going to recognize allies who are those people who are in the majority population, that at least helps that pipeline to exist and for them to look clearly like they're supporting it. So it's not a man versus woman thing. It ends up being a let's all make it better thing.
Okay, go. The good Dr. Dierks is going to watch her daughter present her poster. So this is very exciting stuff, right? No, and I think you bring up a great point, Dr. Huey, right? Like we can't do this alone. And so if you have allies in your shop, promote them. So one of my greatest allies, usually when I talk about microaggressions, I put a little slide up of Anwar Osborne. He has a mnemonic, it's bruh. So the B is for breathe, right? Because when I come storming into our office and he breathes, right? And then he takes a minute, so he is not reflexive, but he is reflective. So he listens to me, right? And then he tries to understand my point of view, that's his U, and his H is hyping someone else never hurts you. And I think that is a huge thing, right? If I promote you, I hope it helps you, but it doesn't mean I don't get an opportunity, right? I'm bringing someone else with me, and I think that's a culture in medicine that is shifting, but didn't exist 30 years ago or 40 years ago, right? It was every man or woman for themselves. So, it's really important, but just take the time to listen to all the men in the audience or those who identify as men. Just listen sometimes. And then often we're not looking for any action necessarily. We're just looking maybe for some validation. Or now maybe I'm not invisible anymore and you've heard my voice, and so next time there's an opportunity, you'll think to ask me.
Yeah, thank you. I actually wanted to make one more comment, on a few of the topics that were talked about. And, we talked about allyship, which is really important. We talked about sort of work-life balance and integration, or seesaws, Dr. Hollander has said in the past. But, I think the data is important, right? And knowing what the data shows and being transparent about it. And, one of the things that probably you all know is, despite the fact that, in terms of the workforce, it's a lot more even with men and women. If there's male and female couples, they're both oftentimes working, even if they make equal salaries. Still, to this day, a greater percentage of the women are doing the traditional roles, which is the housework, raising the children, and those are sometimes some of the barriers that women face in terms of advancement. I think the other thing is recognition and realizing how we evaluate people, and I think I'm going to say something controversial, but it's based upon data that oftentimes men are harder on women in terms of evaluations, but women are also harder on women, and that's based on data. And I will give you an example, and I think one of the things we have to do is stop being defensive. So at my own institution, and this is the data I'm going to share with you, I feel like it's eye-opening, but at the same time not surprising, but it's also data that my chair, Dr. Becker, our program director, Tom Pereira, both men, said, share it, let's be transparent about it. So, we went to another talk from SAEM about awards and how men are recognized more than females. And so it caused me to go back and look at our own data at LIJ, and over 17 years of data, and I passed this awards board, multiple times a day for 10 years. Out of 17 years, we had I'll point out two awards, Faculty Teacher of the Year and Resident Teacher of the Year. So the Faculty Teacher of the Year is voted upon by the residents. The Resident Teacher of the Year award is voted on by the faculty. For the Faculty Teacher of the Year award, how many women do you think won the award? Throw me out a guess. Bingo. For the Resident Teacher of the Year award, how many women do you think won? Close, one. So that's eye-opening data, and I think when I presented that multiple times to our emergency medicine service line, our department, our residents even, I think it was a jaw-dropping moment. But, it wasn't to sit there and say, oh my God, like we're so terrible, but it's awareness, right, of the data. So even in my own practice, in terms of best practices, there's a chance, based on history, based upon how we're socialized, maybe I'm judging women harder than I am judging men. So I am very cognizant every time I do an evaluation, am I judging them for the right reasons? Am I evaluating them correctly? Am I recognizing, a man versus woman, and not focusing on what their background is? So I just wanted to share that data. Thank you so much for coming. Conversation has just begun, and we'll be around for questions.